Hi everyone, welcome back to Minas Tech. Thank you each and everyone for encouraging me with subscribing to my channel. This means a lot. In this video, we will integrate Resilience 4J for a post call. We have started this application creating two microservices and integrated with different tools and services. If you missed it, please refer to my channel. We used fault tolerance Resilience 4J integration for get call scenario. Now we will try to add Resilience 4J fault tolerance for post call. In this scenario, we were just calling department service details in employee service, and individually we were posting department details and employee details. For this scenario, we cannot create Resilience 4J for post call. So let's create two microservices as user consumer and user producer, and we will integrate Resilience 4J for a post call. So we can post our user details via REST call to other service. So let's create a user producer which is connected to database, and this will produce service that manages user details, and we will use a user consumer which consumes service that posts user details, and we will add Resilience 4J to that post call. So let's get started. So before creating a post Resilience 4J, we will see some scenarios where we fail to insert our data. So it might be a network issue when you are trying to save the data from one service to another. Then if any network issue comes, this might help. Also, it can be a service unavailability. If our user producer is not available while sending data from user consumer, then it get fail. So at that time also we can use Resilience 4J. Rate limited, like if the target service, in the sense user producer, enforces rate limit, then Resilience 4J can handle retry with appropriate delays to avoid exceeding the rate limit. Also it can be transit faults. When short-lived service dispute, Resilience 4J is automatically retry for failure post request. If API get failure like timeout or error response, then we can use Resilience 4J at post calls. Along with that, at load handling like high traffic conditions or circuit breaker patterns, also we can use Resilience 4J at post call. Now let's create a user producer service and user consumer service where I will be sending create user data to user producer, and in user producer I'll be saving those data in database. I will be integrating with Resilience 4J for post call, and if it gets fail, I will be calling failback add user method. So let's go to Spring Initializer, create user producer and user consumer, and then upload in IntelliJ IDE. Let's create user consumer and user producer. Let's go to Spring Initializer, taking project as Maven, language as Java. I will create Minas Tech Group dot user producer. For artifact, we'll use user producer service. This service is for user producer. I'm good with package name, packaging as jar, and Java version at 17. So let's add dependencies. I will add web. I need Lombok. I will add H2 for database. I will add Activator. And data JPE. So this is enough for my user producer. Let me download. In a similar way, let me create user consumer. In this, I need web Lombok. I'll remove H2. I'll remove JPA. I need equator. Let me add resilience 4J. So for now, I just need web Lombok, equator and resilience 4J. Let's create and import in IntelliJ. I have imported user producer and user consumer services. I have written the code and I will try my best to explain each and every class. So let's start with producer. So I have created user producer service and I have created few packages like controller, entity, repository and services. Now let's start with entity, where I have created a user class which takes three properties: ID, name and email. Now I have created a repository with user producer repo and extends to JPA repository which takes ID as long. Now coming to service, I have auto-wired my user producer repo and I am saving it to my database. Now coming to controller, I have controller where I am auto-wiring my service class and I have written a method which is post method and I am giving the user details to user producer services. Now coming to configurations, I have created a YAML file which the port number is 7860 and application name is user producer service. And I have created MySQL database configurations. So I am done with my producer. It's a simple code where I am trying to save my data with this port number 7860. Now let's go to user consumer and see what I have done. In user consumer service, I have created a model class which takes same parameter ID, name and email. Now coming to service, in service class I have created my web client where I will be calling my 7860 port which is user producer service, and I have written a method called add user which takes annotation of circuit breaker, retry and time limiter. In circuit breaker, I have given this circuit break name as user service and the fallback method as fallback add user, which I have created here. And I am returning my fallback response message with my throwable message. Now coming to controller, I have called my service where it calls my add user method and I have annotated with user consumer service. Now coming to configurations, I have created a YAML file where I have configured resilience 4J circuit breaker details. Let's see from here. I have created server port as 7861. Now service name is user consumer service and resilience 4J configuration with circuit breaker as default. I can use my service name which is user service here, but I have replicated with default. So if any record exception finds, then I can record IO exception details and SQL exception details. Along with that, if any throwable causes, then I can ignore those exceptions. Now coming to my retry and time limiter, I have written retry post user, where I can configure that instance and I will retry that to the default configurations, which is this. I have given my health circuit breaker enable as true and endpoint health is always show details as always. Now coming back to the testing, I have created some JUnit test classes for test normal operation and test fallback operations. Let's test a normal flow and fallback flow. My SQL data, I have ID as 1, Minastech and Minastech. So let's run this test file. And this is success. So I can able to save my data, and you can check the log in user producer. I can see it has been inserted. Now let's check the database. I have ID as 1. We refresh. Yes, 2 has been created. Now let's check the failure case for fallback method. This can be tested in failure case, network issue, or any kind of issues. Now this got successfully passed as simulator error. Let's see few more examples on creating user producer and user consumer. So let's say in producer service, I have created this method create user with fallback method as fallback create user, and I am returning or throwing runtime exception as service failure. Now in the test case, I have mocked the external service and this might fail, so I will be getting a response as service failure in runtime exception. So now I will be recreating it as a default user with the fallback message. In a similar way, here in user consumer, I have created a method create user, and here I am calling my REST template to the user producer. And now as a fallback method, I have created fallback create user with ID, default and user. In the below image, we are retesting the REST call as post for object and calling the producer services. And as a return, we are returning runtime exception as service failure. In this way, we can configure our Resilience 4J for post HTTP calls.